Hi, I just want to introduce our speaker, who's Carol McCusker. She is the curator at the Harn Museum of Art, and as she reminded me today, she has been there now for 10 years, so which is really great. And she has put on so many wonderful photography shows since she's been there, and as she did also in the museums where she's worked previously. She's very much a doer in that respect and puts them up in a way that makes them very interesting to see. I think her main focus today is going to be on a current exhibit, which is really not about photography. It's called Speechless, Text and Image in Global Culture. Now, it includes photography, but it also includes works of art from all 5 of the collecting areas of the Harn. And it does something very different. I've not seen them do this before. It goes back through, go back to about 1,500 years or something like that. And it takes pieces of art in the Harn collection from all of those, some that are sculptures, some that are fabrics, some that are, paintings and so forth. And what you do is that they combine in an interesting way text, words, with actual visual images of various sorts. And what these do, that they came through those things, they were in various ways making comments about religion, cultural issues, politics, so forth. So it's really a very all-encompassing. And I would say for myself, and I looked at it, I found it a bit difficult to process at first. And so I'm really glad that Carol is here. She's going to help us with this, I think, because this is the kind of exhibit that really could benefit from some context and some comments on it. So that's sort of where we are with that. And she's also going to talk about upcoming exhibits that are photography exhibits that are coming in the Harn. So I'm going to give her time now to get started. She's got a lot to do.
Okay. Do I need that, or I'll use this? Thank you, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for having me. Yeah, hi. I see a lot of familiar faces. Hi, Gigi. Good morning, and I am so happy to be here. Do we have like the first slide? Yeah. So this exhibition was actually something that I inherited, and I was glad to do so because it's always a challenge for me to work outside of photography and to co-curate with another curator. And this exhibition was the brainchild of our former director, Rebecca Nagy, that some of you probably know and remember her well, and we miss her. She was a wonderful curator. And as she handed it off to Susan Cooksey, who was our former curator of African art, she's now retired, Susan asked me to co-curate this exhibition called Speechless, Text and Image. And what it is it's a deep dive into the Harn's collection where we're looking at Asian art, African art, photography, modern and contemporary works. And in a very simple way, it is a matter of just looking at these beautiful works of art that have text as a major component. And it's not always text that we can read, whether, of course, if it's in languages that we don't know how to read, or that there's symbolic language. So let's take a deep dive in. And when you come to the space, I recommend that you just wander. There's no chronological layout of it because of the varying sizes and scale and diminishment and purpose and lighting of all of the work. It's just kind of a place for you to be drawn to something, and all the curators have written carefully about the work so you can get some extra information from it. So as I said, it's a co-curated show with Susan Cooksey and myself, and it's going to be coming down at the end of December, and 57 works from our collecting area. And this is one of the first ones. I actually purchased this work for the Harn, even though it's a lithograph, it's not a photograph. My job is to build the photo collection. But this is by a gentleman, and I'm going to fast forward just really quick. His name is Cliff Joseph. He passed away in 2020 at the age of 99. He had a fantastic life. What I want to point out here is that the photograph was taken by Terry Evans, and this actually was in an exhibition that I did of Terry Evans' landscape photography. But Cliff Joseph was part of her circle in Chicago, so she made portraits as well of the people who were in the landscape and were activists for environmentalism. And so Cliff Joseph was one of them. But let's go back to this work. It is, he was born and raised in New York, but then he moved to Chicago. His works, his paintings primarily, but also his prints, have been at the Tate Modern in London, at Crystal Bridges here in the US, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and the Brooklyn Museum. And what you see here is a lithograph, but the original that he painted on canvas is the major work of art. We couldn't afford to purchase that, but he did make prints from it. And those were equally easy to get a hold of. What makes Cliff Joseph so remarkable is not only his artistic ability, but in the 1960s and 70s, he had an epiphany when he heard Martin Luther King give his speech, I Have a Dream. And he said from there on, he took up art as a serious profession. He became a powerful art therapist. He was the director of art therapy at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York, and also the president of the New York Art Therapy Association. In 1969, as he was practicing and coming up in the world, there was a Metropolitan Museum exhibition, 1969, called Harlem on My Mind, Cultural Capital of Black America. And can you believe it that there was not one piece of art by a Black artist in this exhibition? 1969, Harlem on My Mind. This is going to feed into what we're going to talk about a little later on in this talk. And so Cliff Joseph started the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition, and a group of Black artists picketed in front of the Met to let them know that this was totally unacceptable. And so that was the first foray into a consciousness that museums desperately need to do to this very day, is to open their minds and to expand so that exhibitions, educational programming, the work that's being collected, the artwork, has got to be diverse and multicultural. So what you see here, I just love that, every part of the alphabet has got a part of Black culture, that this is all about demonstrating, the way that just simple letters can also stand in for so much of Black history and Black identity. So let's go back to this picture of him. This is more of the kind of painting that Cliff Joseph is known for. And there's a wonderful website of his work that you can Google. And it's tough stuff. It's really naming the situation. There's no holding back. And he was brave, he was prolific, he was good. And I just think, what a great person. I got to talk to him when I purchased that print. I called him on the phone and got to just speak to him very briefly. And he said, please tell all the people in Florida I love them. So I honor this man. So here's another image that is near and dear to me. Lala Essadi is a Moroccan-American photographer. And what you see here is a feminist, an Islamic feminist statement. And I think it's relevant to what's going on in Iran today, right? She's an artist photographer, and it's set inside an unoccupied house on a larger compound that is owned by her family in Morocco. And it's a place where Essadi, when she was growing up, and other females in the household were sent to this house, this outbuilding in the compound, as punishment for disobedience. And this series takes the house and her confinement and makes it an opportunity to explore the invisible boundaries and sanctioned spaces that are codified by traditional Muslim society. But then Asadi expands them and incorporates a sorority of banished women. And she actually said, we had more fun in those houses than we did in the main house. And so it's a kind of performance. And all the writing, this is Arabic writing, and I'm sorry that you can't see it, but when you come to the Harn, you can see it specifically in the photograph, that is all handwritten, not on the surface of the photograph, because a lot of people think that the photograph was made and then that was superimposed on the surface of the photo. She wrote with henna, as well as with a group of these women, on these copious billowing sheets of fabric. And then also the backdrop, it's all poetry, as well as henna is on their faces, poetry, henna, poetry on their arms and hands. And, you know, there's something also transgressive about that, because calligraphy and poetry writing is traditionally a masculine art form in Islamic culture. But, you know, for her, this was about us taking over and expanding our power. And, you know, if you go on her website and look if this work attracts you, there's more. That's absolutely beautiful. And it can bring up images of the odalisques that the painters, the French painters in the 19th century, when the male French painters went to the Middle East, and they sort of exoticized the women, the harem, the odalisque, as a sexual, desirable body. And so she's actually turning that also on its head by claiming the space and also giving voice and structure and vision to an emerging Islamic feminism. These two I love. I hung these together in the gallery. So Larry Silver was a mid-20th century street photographer. There were a lot of them in New York at that time. And you see the dynamism of Times Square, just a beautiful riot of alphabets and fonts and signage. I mean, this was part of an up and coming, you know, kind of abstraction of urban spaces. And then Don Eddy, who's one of the premier photorealists, a painter mostly, and also a lithograph maker. Their paintings of the photorealists are phenomenal, and that they are looking like photographs, but again, using all of the reflection of glass imagery, things from the street being reflected in the glass, and then also the way that letters then become part of the art form. So I just love that comparison. And if you don't know much about photorealism, I mean, it is what it says, but it is painting that is derived from photography. And it was a movement in the 1960s. Don Eddy was one of its biggest promoters. And the paintings will knock you out. They are so gorgeous. They're so thick and beautiful. The surfaces are airbrushed instead of using an actual brush to paint, so that you can't see the hand of the artist. That's why they look like a photograph. And Andy Warhol was one of the premier people working at this time in the 1960s. And did you know that he was a window dresser for department stores before he became an artist? Or it was one of the ways that he gathered an income and got himself into what would then become such a movement, the Andy Warhol phenomenon. But it is about the glittering surfaces of consumer culture, advertising as an aesthetic. It's really a kind of tour de force. It was kind of short-lived because, I mean, what was happening in the 1960s, the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, things were heating up, the feminist movement, and eventually what people felt like is that as a tour de force as it is, it wasn't saying much. There was no content unless you wanted to look at consumer capitalism as being an affront. And so it kind of went the way of, you know, short-lived art movements. but it's still on the art market today. And to me, I'm just moved by how beautiful they are rendered. Okay, so Louis Forer, one of my favorite street photographers, and then Bernice Abbott. These two are in the exhibition. It's just about, for Louis Forer, he only went out at night and photographed New York at night. Just beautiful. So in love with film noir he was, and so it's so appropriate. This one is of a marquee that's changing out the name of the film. There's something thrilling too and unnerving about these two men that are changing. You know, they're on a ladder and, you know, kind of unsteady. The backlit, the silhouette, it's kind of like a ballet that they're performing. And it's also kind of comic because it reminds me of maybe like a Buster Keaton film or something, but such a beautiful graphic. And the same with Bernice Abbott. She was a New York City photographer. And in 1954, when the US highways that they finally connected from Maine all the way down to Key West, 1954. And do you remember Dinah Shore sang that song, "See the USA in Your Chevrolet"? Well, Bernice Abbott got herself, I don't know if it was a Chevrolet, but she put a trailer on it and it was her darkroom in the back. She had her companion with her and her dog. And she went from Maine all the way to Key West photographing and then back up. And this is one of the results. There's a great patron who lives in California, and he gave us a bunch of her Florida photographs. And so you just see the signage. It's just kind of a riot of, you know, imagery, fonts, action, and not very much like New York City. I think that she struggled with the bright sunlight to not be able to get something that was particularly moody or revealing. So here is a work by Waseny Kozrov. And of course, I would prefer that my colleague Susan Cooksey be here to speak to you about both of these images. I'm just always trying to get up to speed with these, but you know, it's a beautiful image that is paired wonderfully with this 19th century healing scroll, which is actually 6 feet long on vellum, which is a kind of animal skin. And the beauty of the imagery and the calligraphy it's just exquisite. And it's a healing scroll. So the height of it, it's supposed to be pinned up vertically, but you know, we can't responsibly do that because it would sag over time and probably do some serious wear and tear on the work. So we have it in a case horizontal. But it's the height of the person who is ill, and that this healing scroll is the same height as him, and it's pinned by his bed. And all of these are prayers to help him, to guide him to health. And so these scrolls of the ancestors by Kozrov is a kind of inscribing of prayers, but there's no real language here. It's his own symbolic language. But they are in strips, if you see that there's this verticality to them, and very much a vibrant, beautiful image that evokes sacred language. Does anybody know about reverse applique? I was a quilter at one point. And reverse applique, I watched a video yesterday getting ready for this talk that I just watched a woman do it. It is so painstakingly slow and beautiful, but the patience is beyond my quilting ability. So reverse applique, I won't get into it, but it's about tucking fabrics back and then stitching them. And what we have here is the 50th anniversary of Panama's independence. That was in 1903, their independence from Colombia. So this is 1953. And I love that they're using the cool emblem. You know, it's just popular culture. There's kind of an Andy Warhol ingredient here. So it's smoke cool, refreshingly cool. I remember the ads. The penguin was the emblem for cool cigarettes. What you see down here, though, lo and behold, and who knows why, is Noah's Ark. and somebody's throwing an anchor. And somebody's already on the ground, and then there seems to be a holy person. You know, is that Noah? A little cross around the neck. And there's just this riot of just beautiful work, beautiful handiwork. Oops. This is a Chinese scroll. And our curator of Asian art, who has been with us for a little over a year, Tongyang Yin. This is one of the works that I had her lead me through the Asian works in Speechless. And I was very moved by this. At first, it's a very quiet ink on silk scroll. But this particular artist, Wu Shangshu, is known for not only being a master calligrapher, but he was also a poet and also a painter. So the three combinations made him very popular in the late 19th century. But as you see, this was made in 1914. And we know what started then is the First World War. And he was already in his 60s and feeling this change. And that's what the poem is about. The poem is inscribed to discuss what the landscape in this changing environment, cultural and political environment, felt like to him. He said it felt like autumn. He mentions cluster of trees, a rising white cloud, a thatched roof, that the thatched cottage, that the roof was blown by the autumn breeze, and that he had been relying so much of his livelihood on Japanese and Chinese patrons that all of that felt like it was drifting away. And speaking of drifting, if you can see right here, there's a little boat. And so that's emblematic of him kind of finding, you know, the shoreline, a kind of safety under the trees. But then there's this abyss, and then this looming, you know, mountainside. You know, these two units become separate from one another, and of his desire, you know, to keep the relationships going, to keep the images uniting, to keep his work prominent. So there's a kind of melancholy to the image. This is amazing. This is one of my favorite. It's not that big. But I was curious to see it big because it's a tour de force. It's almost like photorealism. But this is graphite, which is actually, you know, inscribing on a lithographic stone. But he drew these lips that, to me, they're so sensual and so realistic, and in such different phases of open, closed, half-closed, teeth showing. And then all of this writing all over it, which is all official writing from the Czechoslovakian government. So was a prominent Czech artist. As I put here, that Kalhanek said that he lived the life of K from Kafka's The Castle, which was to be constantly under surveillance, imprisonment. He went in and out of prison because of his absolute refusal to not speak against the government. And so what you see is the government stamps. And I tried to translate some of these. He was arrested, interrogated. These are all documents having to do with his arrests. And so then the mouths become something different, don't they? Like, to me, it's about the neighbor whispering about you or informing on you. Or perhaps a lover whispering, you know, be careful. There's just a whole other level, and beautifully presented. And I'll end with this one before we go on to two more sneak peeks that I'm going to give you. But this is one of my favorite. Being a fiber artist when I started out, this is one of my favorite artists, Leslie Dill. And she uses fabric, cloth, paper, weavings, you know, everything to do with the fiber arts. And then she's also broken into doing sculpture out of bronze. And that's what you'll see at the Harn. That her materials are part of a kind of performance. These are very elegant, very creative dresses. That one is actually 3D. This is made out of paper. You know, these almost look like rivers leading up to the heart that you see right here in the center of the dress, of names, of places that have just been part of the emotional heart of this person. So here's another installation, just fantastic fabric that's saying something, but also just being fabric in the most glorious ways. And then here is our piece. And I installed it in a very different way. So you're going to have to come to the Harn to see it. But this is another version, but done in a different kind of stone. And then this is a fabric version of it. So glorious. So these letterings are layers that she was inspired by a book that her mother gave her of the 19th century poet Emily Dickinson. So she was reading Emily Dickinson and then started making these beautiful dresses. Now, because of this here, I installed, this is our version of it, but you can see it's two separate parts. When you put them together like that, it does make the dress. But it's hard to read what the letters are saying, and they're an actual Emily Dickinson poem. So taking cues from this, we opened it up and have them staggered on a platform so that the shadow that we have casting on it, the poem is written on the ground behind it. So beautiful installation. So it's actually, you know, a fun exhibit once you know that you don't have to look at it all or take it all in, but just be drawn to, there's 57 objects and some of them are of considerable size. So I'm going to move on to, first of all, yay, 2 weeks ago, President Biden reinstated the NEA and NEH. So that this month, October, is National Arts and Humanities Month. So thank you. You know, as an art specialist and, you know, involved in the museum world, we need all the help we can get. And museums are changing for the better. So this was part of the language in his declaration. And I just bolded and underlined the things that move me very much. And I hope next week, Leanne Chesterfield, our director, will you know, bring these issues up or make it part of her talk. You know, that it is essential to our well-being to have art in our lives, right? It brings us together. It's the democracy of our nation, the soul of America, multiculturalism and democratic, a more perfect union to inspire, to sustain, to anchor us in the diverse communities across our nation so that we can understand and communicate better and to imagine our future. So I'm going to be brief about this, but the changes that museums are going through, and you can read this, you know, I've bolded some of the other areas that I think are important. But in the last 4 to 5 years, art museums particularly are going through a call for change and for them to do more reflection. And art museums, we have to respond, we have to transform. We cannot be for a certain audience. We have to be for everyone, for the whole community. And we need art that represents the multiculturalism of America. We need exhibitions that address this. We need to create educational programs that address it so that it's not just a one-off, you know, where we'll do, you know, a show about Black culture or people of color, and then not have anything for the next 3 or 4 years. It has to be a constant part of our conversation. And I think we'll all be the better for it. And today is Indigenous Peoples Day. So this is a perfect time for us to think about that. I looked up what Indians tribes lived in Alachua County, and many of you may know this more than I do, but it's Potana. The Potana tribe lived here in North Florida, central North Florida, in Alachua County, well before the Spanish came. So this is part of us honoring their day, which we should have every day of the year. And speaking of that, the next show that goes up in the photography gallery, the Rubin Gallery, which opens in November next month and will be up until May, is a show I'm calling Awesome. And time, materiality, and meaning, I'll explain that in a minute. But, you know, to just have a basic description and definition that, you know, awesome is about inspiring reverence, admiration, and fear, as well as the slang, you know, which means super cool, you know. So one of the women that I've collected is this person, Camille Seaman. She is a National Geographic photographer and always had numerous awards. She's just wonderful. She's got several TED Talks, if you ever listen to those. She's a senior fellow for TED Talks, a wonderful speaker, but she's African-American and she's Shinnecock Indian. And she's from Brooklyn, New York, currently living in Ireland. And there you see her with her camera. With this show, actually in the label copy, I'm putting a photograph of the photographers with their cameras, just to make it more real that these are the people that are doing all of this. And, you know, it's a celebration of 15 photographers, their vision, their commitment, their technical prowess, their politics, their survival as freelancers. That's amazing. And also their prodigious journeys that they take to get the image. It's pretty wonderful how far she will go to get these. And then I have some quotes that I'm going to have on the wall. And of course, this is addressing, which is her point, what is happening to the water on our planet? And are we being good ancestors? This is another fantastic image by Fabiola Jean-Louis, where she's readdressing, you know, the notion of 18th and 19th century European paintings, and using a Black model to sort of upend and expand a rewriting of that history to include the people who were a part of that history, but we never see them in paintings like this. So what's remarkable about this is that whole beautiful dress is made out of paper. So she's a multi-dimensional artist, sculpture, paper maker, paper painter, fabric dresser. Most of the objects in her series are all made out of paper that she has sculpted and painted herself. There's a famous Boucher painting that she's quoting here of Madame Pompadour. So you can look that up and it's almost an exact quote. But Fabiola is Haitian American. She grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And we're hoping that we're going to have her next March or April to give a lecture. And what you see here is, I'll be brief. I mean, Haiti does come into the mix here because of these. This is how we're going to frame it. It's being framed right now. It's a linen frame with a gold surrounding. But you know, what you see here are objects of voodoo and a voodoo doll on her lap. And so my interpretation of this, because she is rewriting history, is that Marie Antoinette is the title. And we know her history. She was married to King Louis XVI, and she was dubbed the Queen of Frivolity and Excess. So this was leading right up to the French Revolution. And the poverty-ridden French revolted against her and the king and the aristocracy. And she was guillotined with her husband in 1793 during the French Terror. And the French revolted, as did the enslaved of Haiti, because Haiti at that time was France's wealthiest colony. And the Black labor that made that possible, it made the wealth of Europe's royals and their aristocrats wealthy because of sugar, cotton, cocoa, coffee, and indigo, all coming out of Haiti. And so between 1791 and 1804, inspired by France's Revolution, Haiti's enslaved population rose up and liberated the island and established an independent, self-governed Haiti. And of course, the news today about Haiti is heartbreaking. What more can we say? These two photographs, very moving. Some of you may have remembered this one. It was on the front page of the New York Times, but then also on a lot of social media. I tracked down Sergeant Brandon Kribelar and was able to purchase this for the Harn from Reuters, of which he was a freelance worker. And I compare it to this. This is a new donation to us by Arthur Rothstein, who was part of the FSA in the 1930s, photographing the Dust Bowl. And once World War II started, he joined, he went to Shanghai, where a lot of, I didn't know this about that at all, but in Shanghai, there was a huge influx of European Jews that were fleeing the Nazis. And their passports and visas, it wasn't necessary to get into Shanghai, but by the end of the war, transit papers and money were needed to leave it. And he was part of that group that left Shanghai and took the boats to New York Harbor, and he would photograph the refugees and joined UNRWA then, which is the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. And he worked photographing so that these people could secure their transit papers. They could communicate with family members if they could locate them and find them. It hit the mass media, his photographs, so that communities around the US could help them find jobs and housing and then locate their surviving family. But, you know, knowing the Afghans who were on this plane, this is that rush at the airport in Kabul, if you remember, a year and a few months ago, and the planes that were just jam-packed with people. Imagine, you know, they didn't know where they were going. And where are they now? And when you look at this photograph up close, and I'm hoping that we can light it better than we usually do our photographs, there's a lot going on there. And, you know, part of this exhibition is not only to consider, you know, the photographers, it's about time, it's about materiality, it's about meaning. You know, the photographers' time, materiality, and meaning, but then also you coming to the works as a viewer. And what I want this show to be is about the art of looking and slowing down, the slow art of looking. I'm reading a beautiful book called just Art and Therapy. That's all it's called, by Alain de Botton. And he talks about museums trying to slow people down instead of the 6 seconds that they say most people give to a work of art when they're in a museum. 6 seconds. You know, that I want people to really look. These photographers have gone to such great lengths to create something for us, to kind of expand or readjust what we thought we knew. So I ask these questions for the show is to help people think about the making of these photographs is, does seeing a large physical print, and a lot of these photographs are large, to see an actual print, does it engage you differently than seeing it on a screen or in a book? And if it does, why? You know, the physicality of the print, the materiality of it. Where was the photographer standing? How does framing photographers have to frame. They learn this beautiful aesthetic. And sometimes just, in split seconds, they can see the image coming into view. How do they frame it so that it leads us further into the subject? And do they help us think differently about our own lives and the lives of others? So this is a Russian photographer, Alexei Tintoretko. I want to keep an eye on time. Am I doing okay? So this was also a beautiful gift that was given to us. Alexei is from Russia, as I said, but he did this series in Havana, Cuba. And he said that when he arrived in Cuba and touched down and started walking through Havana, and this was in the early 2000s, he said the atmosphere and the character of it was so reminiscent of Russia, and St. Petersburg in particular, which is his hometown, of Russia like 30 to 40 years earlier. And that there was something that he felt so natural and so beautiful. So I'm going to take you through, this is actually of St. Petersburg right here. This is one of his most famous images. And it reminds you of the great filmmakers Eisenstadt of the early 20th century. I love the dog. And also notice how these aren't crisp black and white photographs, right? They're gray. They're kind of gray, and you can see a little bit of movement of people. He leaves the shutter open. There's a wonderful quote that the future will belong to those who can learn. Think of all of the mechanics that they have to reinvent in Havana. This is a baseball game. So what I love about this is the long exposures, the low contrast printing, and the places that he chooses to stand in, and the way he frames the work. And he said that he's looking for the moodiness of Dostoevsky, and that the ghostly people lightly move amid the heavy stasis of the old buildings and the cars and trucks, and that time itself is seen and felt. This is very poetic. I just love this image. I had to buy it. This is a woman who also is an installation artist and sculptor and photographer, Zhao Hongbin. Tong Yang, our curator of Asian art, also loves her work. This was a whole series that she did, some in scrolls, these beautiful silk scrolls that are photographs of her rabbits. Now, this isn't just one image. She has photographed a single rabbit several times in an aquarium tank that she had built and filled. Normally, rabbits don't like to swim, but she noticed she had a couple of pet rabbits and they liked having their baths. So she decided to build this aquarium and to photograph them. And then she has used digital stitching to put them all into one image. But, it has a symbolic meaning for her. She said that she has used these rabbits as a stand-in for herself, that living in China can sometimes feel chaotic and sometimes oppressive, and that she said, I am always looking for a safe, quiet, and orderly environment. And in this photograph, she said, I'm letting my rabbit represent me in a protected habitat, like a personal garden that is utopian and self-contained. Different moments of my life, peaceful and conflict-free, are represented and combined through my pet rabbit. So it's just a little bit of, joy to look at this unusual image. Some of you may know Clyde Butcher. He's considered the Ansel Adams of Florida photography. And I've had a chance to meet him. Look at how big that large format and tripod. He's up to his waist in the water. This is one of his favorite rivers, the Loxahatchee. And his thing is about preservation and care of Florida's unique environment. And I think Terry Tempest Williams says it best, is that are we looking to the future so that the future generation, there's room for them. This is very, very large, almost as big as you can see it on this screen. That's what a big camera can get you. Sammy Belogi is from the Congo, and he has created this series called Memoir. So back in the 30s and 40s is when Belgium took control of the Congo and was mining it for its rich mineral resources. And Belogi, as a young boy, was always taught through what he said was Belgian books and propaganda films that the miners who were working, of which we see, this is from the 1940s. So this is a black and white photograph made by the Belgians as they documented the mines and the workers. Belogi went into the archives and rephotographed them, and then he himself has made these photographs that he then places them back into. And this is an existing mine, and it's color photography. This is black and white. And so what he's trying to do is to show us that the stories, they're never what we're told they are, right? There's always multiple versions of the story. And he said that the reality is that there was a whole system of deportation and trafficking of people who were bought and brought by force and who had to work in these difficult conditions. But lest we just think, that exploitation is the end of the story, there is international mining going on today in the Congo. China has a huge presence there. But Belogi's, he feels that this is a non-linear sense of time that he's giving us here. It's allowing us to imagine the past as part of the present, and while looking to the future, that he hopes colonial trauma will be healed. So there's a positive uplift to this story. So here's my final sneak peek. How many of you knew Jerry Uelsmann or know of his work? So he passed away last April, and I was hoping that the university, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, I was hoping the university would do some major commemoration of him, because he was a major international artist living in our midst and was a brave and beautiful man. He was funny, he was intelligent, he taught here for 35 years. He made the photo department, starting in 1960 to 1995, a place that people came to study with him. And I think he was pretty fabulous. So I'm doing this show, and I'm hoping that, the train will follow me to do a serious commemoration of this wonderful artist. And so what's fantastic, there's a picture of him, is there'll be about 42 to 45 images of all different sizes. He made small ones to huge 7-foot digital prints, which was a no-no for him. He always did dark room printing, wet chemistry, analog. But there was a few times where he experimented with digital. And so we have that. It's important that, June 6th is just 5 days before his birthday. So that's why I chose this date. He was born on June 11th. And so, we'll hopefully have a time where we can come together, maybe in the auditorium at the Harn, and have a celebration of his life and art. So we'll have the photographs, and these are just beautiful toys. If any of you have been in his darkroom, it's a 3-room darkroom that makes you giggle the entire time you're walking through it until you get to the darkroom itself, which has 7 enlargers. And I watched him print many times. He was a master, so much so that, let me just go ahead to this. We're going to have a bunch of portraits of him in the foyer. made by other photographers. But if you notice here, does anybody know who that is? Ansel Adams. So Ansel Adams, who is probably the best known American photographer internationally, and Emma Jean Cunningham, who is also a contemporary of Ansel's. And this is a young Jerry on his knees. And they are at Point Lobos in Central California along the Pacific Ocean. That's where Ansel Adams lived. And they're giving him a blessing. They are honoring him by giving him an honorary kind of a certificate of being a West Coast, honorary West Coast photographer. And the reason being is that he wasn't a West Coast photographer, not like Ansel Adams or Edward Weston or Emma Jean Cunningham. But what Ansel loved about Jerry is, first of all, the two of them were jokesters. They loved telling jokes. So they had a good rapport with each other. But he admired Jerry's printing. Jerry was par none. Ansel Adams was probably the equal to him. The prints that he made, beautiful, beautifully realized. And so every year, for several years, Ansel Adams invited Jerry to come out and work at the workshops that Ansel Adams had every summer. And people would come from around the world and study with Ansel Adams and with Jerry Uelsmann and Emma Jean Cunningham. So these are some of the photographs. We have the last image that he made. His archive and studio now have been handed down to his son, Andrew. And Andrew is married to Jess, who is our registrar at the Harn. And they have allowed me to go into Jerry's house, which remains just like it was when he passed away. And I kept on thinking he was going to come around the corner. I mean, everything is exactly as he left it. And I want to do a chronological arc of his career. If you look at this is a very straightforward kind of image. This is in Micanopy. And I show that to you because he collected art, and we're going to show some of his collection of other photographers. This is a famous image by Walker Evans. And do you see how it's all about signage, old wooden buildings and signage? So this is in Jerry's living room. So I feel like, when he was getting his chops, that Walker Evans was very much on his mind. And of course, then he started to do combination printing. These are famous images by Jerry, beautiful single image person right there in the water, the boat going up to heaven. There's a lot of mysticism in his work, and angels were some of his favorite objects to collect. This is a very powerful image. Very rarely does he put himself in his photographs. I can count maybe 2 or 3 that I've seen him, but it's a very poignant moment of a change in his life. This is the past, and this is his present. Again, the people who studied with him or loved him, just a beautiful tribute. There's more photographs in these of people who loved photographing him. His collection, this is a Alfred Stieglitz, famous Alfred Stieglitz, a famous Andre Cortege. There's one of the angels that's quite large. Walker Evans, this is a Paul Caponegro of Running Deer. And of course, Edward Weston's Pepper. And then all these whirligigs and this folk art that he collected. This is a 3D sculpture of that famous Hieronymus Bosch painting. He loved dogs. He had dogs all his life. A Superman with a camera around his neck. This is made out of tin and license plates. So I'm going to create the center of the Rubin Gallery is going to be his studio with all of this stuff. And then the periphery will be his work. So keep that date in mind, and I'll see you there. So I'll take any questions or comments or thoughts you have about the shows or. Yes.
You've done fantastic things.
Thank you.
And I want to go back to the one with, I think it was called Stalin with the mouse.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And the writing on there, can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, it's written in Czech, so
No, I don't mean I don't mean,
oh, the content, you
Yeah.
mean the form of it? Well, do you think that he cares whether it's coherent to us?
I'm concerned more so about how it was done.
Well, it's a lithograph, and if you know how lithographs are done, is that you can write on the stone. It's a greasy crayon. And I don't know whether, I'm not a lithographer. Has anybody done that art? I've done it once in my life. It might be that he was able to transfer an actual document by treating it in a certain way and then pressing it. And that's the whole point, is that you put it on a press and you run it through so it adheres to the stone, and then the stone has the image, and then you can run numerous paper through it to create the image. But I'm sure a Czech person knows exactly what's going on here and what's being read, and it's probably a little ominous, if not threatening. Yeah. Yes.
Would you mind displaying Marie Antoinette
Okay,
picture?
gladly.
Yeah. I'm confused about what appears to be a foot at the bottom of her
Yes.
skirt.
That's a paper mache.
But, that's so proportionally out of shape. I mean, if it's really supposed to be a foot, or
Yeah, it
or
is.
is
It's
a
a little
foot.
slipper. And if you look at the Boucher painting, a foot is just like that in the painting, even smaller, because, they made women have very dainty feet in those paintings.
Just a shoe or actually a foot?
It's the model, and it's a paper, slipper. Yep. Yeah, on cameras sometimes too. The way a camera focuses might do that as well. When you see this actual print, the area of focus, this all through here is crystal clear, because she wants you to get that. And then gradually, just a little bit, it starts to fall out of focus as it gets down here. Sorry? No, that's not her. No, she has several models, of which her daughter is one of her models too. So I hope I see you at the Horn. Thank you.
So I just want to thank you, Carol. I think you certainly have lured us into taking a trip to the Harn. So you actually see things a little differently when you see them in person than when you see them in a PowerPoint, but thanks. I know. Oh, thank you so much.